Recently, I've received quite a few questions about the status of the Lake Michigan salmon population. And then on top of that, people have also asked how that affects us and what impacts there will be on us here at the school with our Salmon in the Classroom project. A quick Google search brings up no shortage of headlines regarding this topic. The Detroit Free Press says the salmon population is plummeting in Lake Michigan. MLive, the DNR says the future is not awesome for Lake Michigan Chinook salmon. The DNR itself has question and answer documents talking about the issues that are occurring in the Great Lakes, specifically Lake Michigan. The list goes on and on. This document is from the Lansing State Journal. It talks about what the future is for the Great Lakes salmon. This document is pretty interesting to me. This was an interview with Dan O'Keefe from the Michigan Sea Grant. Dan O'Keefe has come out and helped us with our Salmon Release Day labs, so we have a little bit of a local tie with him. This document is from the Grand Haven Tribune. In order to understand the Lake Michigan salmon population, we first have to go back to the beginning, and we have to go back to why our salmon here in our Great Lakes. Ultimately, that was due to the introduction of alewives. Alewives are small bait fish, and they originally were found in Lake Ontario, and the Niagara Falls worked as a natural roadblock for that species of fish. So those fish that travel the Niagara River, they would come up to Niagara Falls and were unable to go any further. Opening in 1859, the Welland Canal allowed for fish to migrate around Niagara Falls. It was created for the movement of goods. And unfortunately, the negative side effect was that alewives were also allowed to migrate around those Niagara Falls and into Lake Erie. So once alewives entered Lake Erie, they found that there was an abundance of food and no natural predators. So their populations skyrocketed. And slowly over time, the population spread to the other Great Lakes, where again, they found no shortage of food and no predators. So their populations went through boom and bust cycles. Their population would get very large due to the excess food. When the population got extremely large, it would reach the carrying capacity, and that population would eventually die off due to the fact that it would eat itself out of any excess food. So the population would die off, and we would end up with these large masses of dead fish that would float up along shorelines. So fishermen, beachgoers, and property owners along the Great Lakes got very upset about massive die-offs of fish because, as we know, a bunch of dead fish along the beach shore not going to smell very well. In order to combat the growing alewife problem, the DNR proposed introducing salmon. Originally, salmon were introduced in 1870. However, those introductions were not successful. Partially that was due to the fact that alewife populations had not spread out through the Great Lakes, and their population was not very large either. So in 1966, the DNR introduced coho salmon into Lake Michigan. In 1967, Chinook salmon were introduced into Lake Superior and Lake Michigan. And they really kind of became saviors of this issue of boom and bust cycles of the alewife population. The alewife population was reduced. A large number of anglers went to the Great Lakes in order to target the salmon species. From 1967 to 1970, The returns on the salmon that were input into Lake Michigan and the tributaries were exceptional. Around 13% of all of the fish stocked into the Great Lakes were returned to anglers. And because of that, the Chinook salmon populations and the stocking programs were spread to Lake Huron in 1968, Lake Ontario in 1969, and Lake Erie in 1970. Since that time, the salmon fishery has become a multi-billion-dollar sport fishery, especially in Lakes Michigan and Huron. As we are aware, there are a number of other invasive species to the Great Lakes ecosystem. The sea lamprey, the rusty crayfish, the round goby, the zebra mussel, just to name a few. So we need to focus in on the zebra mussel when we're talking about this demise of the salmon population in Lake Michigan. Zebra mussels were originally detected in Lake St. Clair in 1988, and they're native to lakes in southern Russia. The thought was that they ended up in Lake St. Clair through the dumping of ballast water by ocean-going barges. The zebra mussels were stowaways in that ballast water, and when it was released into Lake St. Clair, the zebra mussels were released as well. So much like the alewives, the zebra mussels are found in Lake St. Clair, where there's an abundance of food and no natural predator, and their population starts to multiply. And they're very successful at reproducing, partially because of the availability of food, and also the availability of space. So in order to understand this completely, we should talk about a food chain. Solar energy coming in from the sun is used by photosynthetic organisms like phytoplankton to create sugars. Those sugars are then used by those organisms to build the structures that make up the organism. Phytoplankton are eaten by zooplankton. Zooplankton are eaten by macroinvertebrates. And the zooplankton and macroinvertebrates are both eaten by alewives. And so the alewife population, when introduced, had a high availability of food. The salmon population is introduced, and the salmon population keeps the alewife population in check. And also, as we learned in our salmon release labs, macroinvertebrates are eaten by salmon when they are young in the river systems. So in this food chain, the salmon are still saviors of the issue that was occurring with the alewife population. In comes the zebra mussel. Zebra mussels are filter feeders, and they are very good at filtering out the water column. When we look at water in the Great Lakes, and it's very clear, and we can see down 20 or 30 feet, many people have the false impression that that's very clear water and it's very high water quality. That is not necessarily the case. In order for there to be a healthy, sustainable ecosystem, there has to be an abundance of phytoplankton. And usually that phytoplankton, along with algae, are what cause the cloudiness to water. When the zebra mussel are filtering those out, we see very, very clear water. And so the zebra mussels are easily able to reproduce. As they reproduce and filter out the phytoplankton, it does not allow for the zooplankton and the macroinvertebrates to have food sources. So their populations decline. When their populations decline, so do the alewife populations. And because the alewife population declines, so does the salmon population. And the zebra mussels are left to reproduce, to feed on the phytoplankton, and completely limit the available food source to start the entire food chain. So we truly are seeing a decline in the overall salmon population in Lake Michigan. This decline is due to a domino effect starting with the zebra mussels. Alewife populations were on the decline by the early 1970s, but the zebra mussel introduction really sped up this decline in population. In 2003 and 2004, we saw similar circumstances in Lake Huron. And so the DNR is talking about declining the overall number of fish that they're stocking into Lake Michigan and its tributaries in order to prevent an entire collapse of the ecosystem with regard to salmon in Lake Michigan. I now want to transition and talk about what this could mean for us here at the school. But first, our 2015 and 16 accomplishments. This was the 6th year we were part of the program. 3 of 4 of our licensed teachers picked up eggs, so that was a total of 600 eggs that we picked up at the beginning of the school year. At the end of the school year, we released 402 salmon, and they averaged in length between 2.5 inches and 3.5 inches. Here are some images of students acclimating fish to the creek water to prepare them to be released. As you can see, due to the sheer number of fish that we released, we had quite a few fish in each individual bag that had to be measured. We were also successful at wearing out a whole lot of 8th graders. This was our return trip after our salmon release labs. So the future for us. Currently, we're looking into the possibility of a pilot program with the DNR, the possibility of raising brown trout or brook trout or grayling. I kind of joke about this. There is a PhD student at Michigan Tech currently that's working on the reintroduction of grayling into a Manistee River tributary. He is working with Dr. Nancy Auer. And so that is actually in the works here in the future. We may actually see a population of grayling again here in the Great Lakes tributaries. We're looking at bridging the project into our high school. We've started a GoFundMe. This right here is what we're looking to purchase through that GoFundMe. It's pretty expensive. It's a research grade tank system that would allow us to do a lot of quantitative analysis of fish growth. We've also put in a greenhouse grant to the Gratiot County Community Foundation. Ultimately, we would like to wrap this around some agriculture as well. We'd like to build a structure similar to this, where the 2 structures we see on each side towards the back would be the tanks. In the center, this would be our filtration unit, specifically for filtering out solids. And then this water would, through gravity, run down into a series of grow beds where we could plant a number of species of plants. This type of project would do a very good job of matching the new Michigan science standards. And then the water would continue to be gravity fed down to a sump in the back and pumped back up into the holding tank for our salmon. It would be completely filtered. All the nitrogen components would be completely removed, and so the water would be perfectly clear for our salmon to survive in until they were released at the end of the school year. We've also done a number of professional developments and continue to do that in the future. Mr. Heiler and myself have the opportunity to present at the Michigan Science Teacher Conference this next school year. So that is in the works. We're planning on doing that. Him and myself are also planning on attending an institute on Beaver Island this summer. We are looking at different ways in which we can teach students about field research. Mrs. Smith and myself have done new teacher training for people that are entering the Salmon in the Classroom project through the Department of Natural Resources. So we spent a day down at Wolf Lake State Fish Hatchery in order to present our specific project to them and give them a number of resources that they could use as they plan on implementing their own Salmon in the Classroom project.